On Saturday, Dr. Dina Henshaw reported that Alberta had 1,731 new COVID-19 cases and 5 more deaths. On the same day, Ontario reported 1,708 cases, even though Ontario's got 4 times the population of Alberta. I mean, that's amazing. So Alberta has a huge problem, and it's only going to get worse. My interviews with Alberta healthcare professionals suggest the hospital system is on the verge of collapse. Yet, on Saturday, in Calgary, hundreds attended the so-called Freedom Parade downtown, refusing to wear masks despite the provincial mandate and harassing and even assaulting journalists covering the event. Who are these people? We actually have a very good idea thanks to an Angus Reid survey from August. So Angus Reid divided them into 3 groups. First one is the infection fighters. These are folks that follow the rules, make up 47%, almost half of Canadians. I'm an infection fighter. My wife is an infection fighter. Our mother-in-law, my 94-year-old mother-in-law, is part of our household. We've been quarantining since early March. We rarely go out. When we do, we have masks, and we're responsible. And so we're infection fighters. Second group, which makes up 36% of Canadians, are the inconsistent. Now, these are folks that follow the rules sometimes, don't follow the rules other times. And it's not that they're irresponsible necessarily. I have a friend of mine who's a retired nurse, and she lives alone, and the loneliness is more than she can bear sometimes, and so she goes out and socializes in restaurants and so on. Maybe she shouldn't, but you know, it's really difficult for her. So, but it's the third group that we really need to pay attention to, and this is the cynical spreaders. They make up 18% of the Canadian population. These are folks who just don't care. They refuse to wear masks. They are not only don't care about public health policy, they're actively antagonistic towards it. They have a clear dislike for it. And political leaders, how the political leaders have handled the pandemic. Now, doesn't that sound like the people in the Freedom Parade? Angus Reid has more interesting information on cynical spreaders. They're under 35. Many of them have high school education or less. And here's a really telling statistics. Cynical spreaders are 4 times more likely to have voted Conservative in the last federal election than Liberal or NDP. Given that Alberta is the bastion of Canadian conservatism, it will not surprise you to learn that Angus Reid says 28% of Albertans are cynical spreaders. That's right. Almost 3 in 10 Albertans are opposed to responsible pandemic behavior, just like the participants in the Freedom Parade. Well, it's time to stop flouting mask wearing and social distancing in public. It's time to put an end to freedom parades and similar behavior. Canada is not the United States. Our Constitution promotes peace, order, and good government, not liberty. We have freedom of expression with reasonable limits to speech and behavior, not absolute freedom of speech. At the very least, and I mean this is the very, very least that Premier Kenney can do, he must publicly condemn cynical spreaders and the folks who were in that Freedom Parade. According to Angus Reid, cynical spreaders are his party's voters and supporters. But since when do Canadians put political expediency over the lives and health of their fellow citizens? And why didn't the Calgary police enforce mask and gathering rules during Saturday's so-called Freedom Parade? Why were journalists assaulted and harassed instead of protected? Mayor Naheed Nenshi in Calgary must ensure that his police force enforces the rules. Stop talking a good game and start playing one, sir. Enough is enough. If political leaders like Kenney and Nenshi fail to act, it isn't hard to predict what will happen next. Angry citizens will fight back. In the digital age, citizens can identify cynical spreaders like those in the Freedom Parade and call them out on social media. Report their participation in the Freedom Parade to their employers. Boycott businesses that support cynical spreader employees. This will only lead to further polarization and hardening of attitudes in all camps at a time when all Albertans, in fact all Canadians, should be coming together to fight the scourge of COVID-19. If Alberta's leaders fail to act, it will lead to a situation similar to the United States, where Donald Trump's pathetic leadership helped create a situation where COVID-19 is out of control. On Friday, the US reported a daily record of 205,000 cases. And their death total is now over 266,000, and it appears to be out of control south of the border. If Alberta follows the US, here are two examples that could affect you and your loved ones. So I interviewed Dr. Neil Grisdale, and he practices medicine in the Turner Valley area south of Calgary. And he worries that if a patient, for instance, has a heart attack, maybe in a couple, 3 weeks, when the next big wave of COVID-19 patients hits the system. So that patient needs to be transferred to Calgary, to Foothills, or one of the other hospitals for acute care. There's no beds for him. What happens then? And if he does get the acute care, who does he push out of a bed that should be in a bed? Then there's Doctors Shazma Mathani and Daisy Fung of Edmonton. I interviewed them, and after 10 months of fighting COVID-19, they and their healthcare colleagues are exhausted. They are pushed right to the brink. The next wave of COVID-19 patients that I talked about are expected in a week or two, and it may be more than they can cope with. Maybe they get sick and they're not available. These are very practical consequences, and the odds are that even if you don't get COVID-19, or somebody in your family or your social network doesn't get COVID-19, they could very easily be affected anyway. So Alberta's in the grave danger of becoming like the United States, and it really has to avoid this situation at all costs. And avoiding it begins with political leadership. Lives hang in the balance. Premier Kenney, Mayor Nenshi, the other political leaders in Alberta, act, please.